mastodons and so on and so forth, whereas the Comet Research Group scientists are saying no, those huge megafauna of North America were wiped out as a result of the massive series of impacts on the North American ice cap.
I'm reading a book right now by Dan Flores, a really interesting book called Coyote America. He's a wildlife historian, and he is really an expert on all the different forms of wildlife in North America, where they originated, where they migrated to. And one of the more fascinating things about it is he's talking about all these animals that went extinct, 10,000 plus years ago, this mass extinction event, and never once does he bring up cataclysms, and there's all these different ideas, and one of the big ones being that human beings with atlatls, which is like really a very weird sort of a spear-throwing device, wiped out the woolly mammoths and all these other animals, and
to me,
it's
a lunatic,
so preposterous.
It's a lunatic idea. Also, if you have any contact with hunter-gatherers today, you find that hunter-gatherer peoples don't overkill their game. They hunt them respectfully, they take what they need, and they leave the rest because it's a renewable resource for them. So I don't think hunter-gatherers wiped out the mammoths in North America. The evidence is compelling it was the comet.
Well, the evidence that you brought up when you were here the first time, when you showed the images of all those mammoths that had been literally knocked over with broken legs from the impact of something, mass burial grounds, like these mass... not burial grounds, obviously, but mass casualties.
Mortality sites.
Mortality sites. That's a good way of putting it.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, in fact, Graham and I visited one up in South Dakota called Hot Springs, where there's just several dozen. Nobody knows how many are actually there, but there's at least several dozen two species, woolly mammoths and Columbian mammoths, that have been entombed. And while we were there, interestingly, the guide, the woman giving us the tour there, was kind of giving a gradualist explanation that, well, over long periods of time, these mammoths wandered into a sinkhole and were too dumb to get out, and so they became entombed. And I asked the question, well, what studies have been done on the sedimentary matrix in which their remains are being found? Because as I'm looking at this sedimentary matrix, I'm seeing a massive deposit. In other words, a deposit that was
instantaneous.
Instantaneous. And when I brought that up, she actually got very irritated and
really,
dismissed my question. Didn't well, we've got it all worked out. We know about that. Well, what is it? Well, we've got it all worked out, and then immediately went on with her narrative. But yet I had an article that was actually written by one of the original scientists that worked on the site, and his description was, well, it could have been that, but also as an alternative, and he used the term bloat and float, that what you had was woolly mammoths that had been caught in a flood, drowned, and their bloated carcasses floated into a depression in the landscape, and that's where they were entombed. And that makes a whole lot more sense to me than the fact that, individually over several thousand years, these mammoths wandered into this sinkhole and then couldn't get out. But you got to bear in mind, we're talking about, at the end of the last ice age, 120 roughly species of megafauna that disappeared, which is about equivalent to the same number of megafaunal species that inhabits the Earth today.
Well, it was a short period of time where something like 65% of the North American mammals went extinct?
75%.
75%.
Yeah.
A very short period of time, right?
Very short period of time. Pretty much totally coincident with that period called the Younger Dryas.
And so there's nothing resembling what we're capable of doing today back then. I mean, when you look at human extinction events, human-caused extinction events, well, it's very logical. When what we're doing today with pollution and the expanse of civilization and weapons are super sophisticated. If we wanted to, we could wipe out a lot of different species.
Yeah, but what we're
actually
actually seeing is that at the end of what's called the Bowling Alarod, which was the gradual warming at the end of the last ice age that preceded the sudden catastrophic change at 12,800, was the Clovis culture that existed for 300 to 500 years, I think.
Yes.
Somewhere. But they suddenly were gone, right? Exactly simultaneous with the mammoths. And then there are interesting studies that coming out now showing that at least continental-wide, there was apparently a major human population crash exactly coincident with the megafaunal extinctions, because you had quarries that had been mined for centuries that are suddenly abandoned. You have campsites that had been that had generations of debris and toolkits accumulating and so on, debris from the fluting of the